e tū whakaiti ana I a hau I mui a koutou, ngā kārangaranga maha o tēnā rohe. Te tuatahi, e tautoko ana ngā karaki a ngā mihi o te atanei, ki a koutou ngā kaiwhakarite o tēnā mahi tēnā ki koutou. Ki a koutou ngā morihu kraua kuia o Mātātua waka, Tākitimu waka, Haurauta waka, Tainui, Te Arawa, Aotea, e kurahupo hoki, kei te mihi ake. Hoi no kāre tōro ngā kōrero, ka haere te hui, ka haere te wā, no reira, tēnā tātou. Okay, it's been a long day. Everyone wants to go home. I do. No. But it's been very inspiring and enthralling, the different kōrero from the different speakers that we've heard this morning and this afternoon, all on the kaupapa of the influence and impact of Te Kooti. Now, like all of us, I wear a lot of hats in terms of my iwi, but today my hat is Ngāti Awa. My hapus within Ngāti Awa are Te Whakaia, Rangi Hauhiri, Ngā Maihi, Te Tāwira and Ngāti Hikikino. So it's coming from that perspective, sort of. In other words, while this is a version of Ngāti Awa perspective, it's not the only one. I know there'll be people watching going, oh yeah, sort of thing, nera, a kaitspai, no problem. So there are other perspectives that I won't be covering because that lies in the kōrero of those particular whānau and hapu. So what I wanted to talk about this afternoon was a little bit of, so how did Ngāti Awa encounter Te Kooti? And do we have any particular distinctive elements or aspects in our connection and our relationships? Now, the other point is that at this time of the day, it's a lot of information overload, and if you're like me, I just like looking at the pictures. So there'll be a few of those. Okay. Now, these are just some pictures of Ngāti Awa involvement and connection with Te Kooti and Te Hāhi that I'll talk about very shortly. So where's the start? Well, like all of us involved in this era of the New Zealand Wars, began with confiscation. As we've heard from earlier speakers, there was an order in council confiscating 448,000 acres of land from the tribes of Mātātua. Now, the coloured areas are some of the lands that were returned, including to rebels, using that word. Isn't it strange how the world goes full circle? And in a previous, earlier time, the label rebel was a bad thing, but now we sort of wear it like a badge of honour. And the other one, it's sort of like, oh, okay, we won't talk about that much. Anyway, you'll see there in the middle, right at Whakatāne, there's a chunk of land going all the way inland to the confiscation line. Like other tribes, including Te Whakatohia, those are reserves, so-called, nera, where people were put back onto land. Now, one of the complications, of course, is that often the government will put people in the land who don't belong there, even within the iwi. And that causes friction and tension, some of that which lasts to today. When you see other hapu put in your land saying yes to a resource consent for something that your marae is totally against, causes us problems. This is one of the legacies of raupatu that we still have to endure. So, this was the leader of our rebels, one of them. Te Hura te Tai Whakaripi, he was 50 years old at the time, in 1865, when they laid down their arms at Te Kupenga in October of that year. Now, listed there are the names of most of our people who were taken away for imprisonment on a charge of murder of one of our whanaungas called Hemi Te Mautaranui Falloon, or James Falloon. Our people who were executed were dealt with at the same time as Mokomoko and our whanaungas from Te Whakatohia as well. So, what happened when they got out of jail? When Te Hura was released, finally, Rewi Maniapoto and others, including Hāmiora Mangakahia from Hauraki, had to act as like the bailee. You know, like someone's on parole, they get out early, home detention type of thing. And so the other leaders of the tribes had to act as the bailee, the surety for Te Hura. So he went to the king country, and then the rest of our people who had been incarcerated and their whānau followed. Because remember, especially for some of the hapus, their lands had been confiscated and given to other tribes, who then alienated them. So they had nowhere to go. So they followed into the king country to be with Te Kooti. Now they stayed there for a decade. You know, that's a long time to be away from your home. Sure, some went back and forth. Keep an eye on things back at home, you know. Land commissions turning up, native land court. But the bulk of the community stayed intact around Te Kooti within the king country, Te Rohe Potae. Now, how do we know all this? As Taiarehe mentioned earlier, oh, this is my karaua or my kuia's kōrero. Well, there's a bit of that, but there's also referencing Taiarehe, you'll be pleased to know. Little things like, we all thought Te Hura had died, but he went and turned up to the tangi of Hori Tupaia, the chief of Ngāti Awa. How do we know? It was in the paper. And the other thing to remember, that when Te Hura was sort of seen as the cause of confiscation in our district, or one of the causes, it was curious to us that when the wharenui Hotonui was being built at Thames as a marriage present between Ngāti Awa and Ngāti Maru, a po of Te Hura was carved in the porch. It's still there today if you go to the Auckland Museum. And we thought it was a curious thing. We had assumed, wrongly as it turns out, that Te Hura must have died because a po was made of a deceased person. So we thought, wow, as I say, the newspaper report said, oh, Kao, he was still alive. So that also was of significance to us, that a po was made of a person who supposedly is one of the rebel leaders, and while he was still alive. Anyway, that was one little piece of information. One of our ancestors, Hawara Te Hihira, was with, he went to jail as well. When he came out, he went to the king country. How do we know? Because his youngest son's death certificate says that he was born in Te Kooti, where his father was with the rest of that community. The Barton Commission, one of these millions of commissions that are set out in David Williams' book, Te Kooti Tango Whenua, we know that our people were also still at Rohe Potae in 1886 after the pardon, because the commission minutes record one of our growers, Hunia Marupo, saying, this other guy is still in the king country. Now, a lot of our people who were with Te Kooti, the epidemics of the time, of course, many died young, and finally, in 1885, they were exhumed and brought back to one of our cemeteries, one of our urupa, at Whakatane at the coast. So that's the evidence, if you like, that we rely on to confirm both our oral traditions and the written histories. Right. One of the most significant figures in terms of the relationship between Te Kooti and the Hāhi and Ngāti Awa was through this person here, Te Hurinui Apanui. Now, those are three photographs of him. First, obviously, when he's quite young, in his late 20s, early 30s. The middle is when he's taken, there's a photo that's erroneously described as the elders of Rua Kenana's council. And you can see there that Te Hurinui started to grow his hair long in the style of Rua and his supporters. And then the far photograph shows Te Hurinui in later life. It was actually 1912 when Mayor, of all people, was pōhiri'd on to our maraes at Whakatane, where he met the people he had chased during the New Zealand Wars era. Anyway, why is Te Hurinui a significant figure? This all relates to Te Whiti Te Kau. the Union of the 70 that had been created amongst the Uruwera to stop land sales, to stop the Native Land Court, anything to do with tauiwi trying to hop in and access lands. The Whitu Te Kau was a form of self-government in the context of that rangatiratanga that we often hear about. And Te Kooti came along and said, well, 70, let's make it an even number. Let's make it 80. And let Te Hurinui be the custodian. So as a consequence, Te Hurinui Apanui, his uncle Wepiha had been one of the leaders of the tribe beforehand, and then their grandfather, Apanui Te Hau Maiwaho, those were the people who carved the mātātua wharenui or oversaw its carving, as well as Hotunui. And Apanui died in 1880, his son Wepiha in 1888, a year before Te Rangitukehu, the leader of the tribes at Rangitaiki, he died. So Te Hurinui was therefore the main spokesperson, leader of Ngāti Awa at that time. And as I say, Te Kooti put on him the role of being the custodian. Another dimension of our relationship with Te Kooti was, like many tribes, as we've heard before with Tāne Whirinaki, Whai o Te Motu and the house at Te Kuiti, is the building of wharenui. And there are two that we know for certain were built at the instruction of and with the oversight of Te Kooti, who provided the carvers, the materials, the resources, everything. And they are Orua Taupare, which is at Kokohino Marae, Tuhimata Marae in Te Teko, and Pukeko Marae at Poroporo. Now, I just found that bottom black and white photo. There's a few of our ngā mea mōhio there. Hoani Waititi standing next to Patu Hōhepa, standing next to Tāhirini, next to Lady June, and next to Lady June is Professor Linda Smith, and in the front is Aroha Mead. So there you go. For all those ones who say, oh, Hirini never goes to the marae, there you go. See, before you were born. Sorry. Okay, so we know for certain that, as I say, Te Kooti had oversight of the building of those houses. Now, when Orua Taupare was opened in 1882, even though it says 1884 on the house, anyway, separately, he didn't attend, but he sent a waiata and a kupu. And as we all know, some of his kupu whakaari, at first blush, when you first read them, they seem very harsh. You know, they seem quite jarring and confronting. And within them, we have to make our own interpretations, because even at first glance, where it seems like it is a harsh message, if you keep looking, you'll find the ones that might provide a more positive dimension. Now, what do I mean exactly? And it's not just marae, places he visited in Ngāti Awa as well. So the kupu he gave for this whare, and it's, you know, well known amongst us, and again, it's not a pleasant one when you first read it. Yes, my friends, what a beautiful house you have. The only trouble with it, as far as I can see, is that one wall is arguing against the other. The door against the back wall, the juniors against their seniors, the children against their parents. And I looked at the contents of this house and I see stones, sand, bush lawyer, but beyond them is the rich, fertile ground. And it's almost, you could argue, a form of like hypnosis. As soon as a kupu whakaari is given out, we start fulfilling it, almost subconsciously. You know, and I don't mean any disrespect to my Ngāti Nuku Ngāti Ahi Te Pahipota Whanaungas, not in the slightest. But, you know, there is a tradition of two separate schools of thought, can we put it that way, with that particular marae. And, I mean, when you go there, you can see it. It's there in front of you. You know, and other different customs and traditions as well. One particular line will have their tūpapaku in the wharenui itself, and another branch will have theirs in the building next to the wharenui. So there's, those different approaches to things. Anyway, one thing that is definitely clear, though, is the rich, as has been alluded to in earlier remarks, the rich, fertile ground. And from time to time, like the River Nile, rangitaiki floods, as we've seen with Edgecombe and other places, and it's, as has been mentioned, well known as a place where kai grows well. So that's that last comment there, te one matua, the rich, abundant earth. In our own area of Te Whakaia, the Kooti came past again in 1893, in April, as he was going back to Hokianga at Ohiwa Harbour, and he met up with one of his spokespersons for Ngāti Awa, a fellow called Taupe, or Hoani Poruru. And he also gave a kupu on the occasion of that visit. And once again, it might be interpreted as, in a slightly negative light, but it depends how you read it and how you interpret it, and most important of all, how you apply it in your everyday. And he said to Hoani Poruru, "E hoa, Taupe, why have you built your house on the stump/swamp, dividing the land, the people and their beliefs?" Now, you might think, oh, that doesn't sound very nice, might have negative connotations, but in reality there's a practical dimension as well. The place would often flood. So in the end, in about 1904, a move started gradually to where our community is today at Te Pāroa, because of the proximity of the marae and the pā to the Whakatane River. And of course, at the same time, in those days, all our rivers were connected. Tarawera, Rangitaiki, and the bridge was Te Orini, connecting us to the Whakatane. Then they started dredging and all this carry on, so all of the patterns of the rivers and the watercourses were all upside down. So as a consequence, there was continual flooding near the pā at Otamoru. So the elders of the time decided, well, let's get to higher ground. So they shifted to Te Pāroa, where Te Whakaia is today. Now, we tāre, Wiremu Pākehā, one of our tuhunga from Te Māpou, there are three centres of the hāhi within Ngāti Awa: Te Whakaia, Te Māpou and Kokohino. Now, one of the leaders and elders of Te Māpou, Wi Tāre, he added his own dimension to this kupu as well. As Tai had said earlier, I'll leave that for you to read in your own time. I understand all our presentations are going to be made available, but it's that same message that how do we deal with division amongst ourselves so that it can either be made a strength or it can be minimised? Okay, so what about the here and now? Now, these are our main maraes where our te kaumārua and hapati are held from time to time. Kokohino, Te Whakaia, Te Māpou, and also at Puawairua and Ruaihona. Now, each peka, or part of the hāhi within Ngāti Awa has their own customs and traditions and role. At Te Māpou, for example, it's referred to as Te Hāhia Te Kooti Rikirangi me Te Whakapono. These sorts of things. Within Te Whakaia, at one stage, we were part of a concept of te kotahitanga, and then that changed, as I was informed earlier this morning, into te whānau pane. And there are all sorts of reasons and layers and dimensions to these aspects. Another important element with the hāhi within Ngāti Awa is te reo ke, which is a special language that the people who know about it know. It's one of those need to know basis, Those who know need to know, and anyone else doesn't know. So I'll leave that there. Now, in the middle picture, you can see there three of our korauas Tāmati, Kaiwhata, Āniheta Rātene, and Wihi Reneti. And Wihi in particular was one of our main po of Te Hāhi amongst Te Whaka in those days. And, you know, these are traditions that are linked to whānau groups and to their uri. And I'll come to that very shortly. Okay, so these are just, like everywhere, all of our hapu and iwi can refer to individual kroua and kuia who had a particular connection with Te Kooti and through the hāhi. And these are just a few that I'll just go through very quickly. So Te Hirata Hāwera is the daughter of Hāwera who was at King Country with Te Kooti and stayed there most of the time. And they were total and staunch supporters of him, even though her husband, Takotuhiwi, followed another hāhi, mihi ngare, hoi no. Te Make. Now, Te Make rangi, he was a tūhaurangi Te Pahipoto Ngā Maihi chief, and he was quite a popular bloke, had quite a few wives, and including Hēni Te Auraki of Te Aitanga Mahaki, and our Ngāti Awa Taiwhaka Kuia Te Mate Huirua Marupo. So these two women here, their fathers were with Te Kooti at King Country for that decade. Now, Te Make, along with the next kroua, Te Haupai, they were the predecessors to Te Kahutu and the Kaitiaki of Wainui 313 Trust. So they were the original, amongst the original trustees, Te Make and Te Haupai. And of course, this is the house Turanga Pikitoi at Cheddar Valley. And the kuia that I just mentioned, Mate Huirua, and her brother here, Te Haupai, in 1938 and 1958, they lay at that whare. Te Haupai's wife was from Roimata. This is a well-known photo in our community, and it just shows you how the world changes. It's on one of our Hapu Marae Facebook pages, and it's got the most hits and likes. Like, more than everything else put together. Like, it's in the thousands, nearly. Which is quite telling there, you know, quite telling. All of these four kuia followed Te Kooti. The two in the middle, Matu and Moirangi, they were also in the King Country. Parehona, she was also, and Huriana Te Wara, likewise, and has our Tūwharetoa connection. Now, Huriana on the far right, her parents were killed, both of them, in the Tarawera eruption. And when the Tarawera eruption occurred, the kuia next to her, Moirangi, gives a detailed account of how the rocks were falling around them as they were trying to walk from Te Teko to Marata in the dark. And Pētera was their tuhunga who led their karakias as they walked that distance in the dark with the rocks and lava and everything else and ash coming out of Mount Tarawera. So these were kuia who had a personal connection, if you like. They knew Te Kooti, like many of us, like many of our kroua and kuia, knew him personally and have given kōrero themselves. Now, the two in the middle in particular, Matu and Moirangi. Matu has a family connection, which I'll mention very shortly, and Moirangi a more distant one, but they were amongst our main kuia who were supporting Te Kooti. There are many others, and just, you know, when you're rushing, you can't get all your photos you need. But these two in particular, as I say, Matu would have been in her late teens when he died. Moirangi was much older. She was 104 when she died in 1976. So, you know, she knew him personally and had nothing but good things to say about him. And there's a story in the Whakatane Beacon headed, Grand Old Dame thinks Te Kooti was the Māori Napoleon. Something like that, you know. Typical. Anyway. These are just some photos of our Ngāti Awa kroua and kuia supporting Te Hāhi and the connection to Te Kooti. And the photograph at the top right, you'll see a very youthful koro wetere with Eruera Manuera and some of our other Tūhoi and Whānaupanui relations. Next to them, another quartet of our speakers and tohunga of that time. Akuhata Kiingi, the names are all there anyway. At the bottom there, it's a famous photo within Ngāti Awa of Hemi Te Pono of Te Māpau with the flag. And then in the middle there, you see a mixture of our people there. In the corner is Te Raki next to Wetini Moko. Matu is in the middle, and two other kuias, sorry, whose names just escaped me. Now, Wetini Moko, he's the uncle of Hirini Moko, Hirini Mead. So Wetini's mother is Wetini's sister. And Wetini was the carrier of Karakia and Te Hahi at Kokohino, and then his son, Te Rangitipuki Waho, or as we would say, Uncle Fred. Okay. As I say, you know, everyone's got these sort of photos and pictures within their own hapus and iwi, so here's a famous one. The short point is this. Almost every single hapu of Ngāti Awa is represented in that photo, and all of the people there supported Te Hahi and Te Kooti. So you have Eruera, his wife Pareake, Parekura Tūtua, Mere Brown, Mrs. Tihi, Anihete Rātene, Wiremu Pākehā, Blind Dan Mason, and in the front Te Kākaho Te Ua, and Matarena. Every hapu of Ngāti Awa is covered by those people. And the other point to bear in mind, which is very interesting for us, is that that group of kaumātua, along with our Uncle Hare, they were the founders of our Ngāti Awa Trust Board. Unlike other tribes, including raupatu tribes, Ngāti Awa never had a trust board. And Hirini went to see Sir James Fletcher, you know, we heard it earlier, tahi mana te tangata, to say, hey, what do we need to do? How can we help? How can we get us a trust board? We need the government to help us. And Sir James Fletcher said, no, you don't, just do your own. So we did. And the person who moved the motion was Eruera, over there on the left. It was seconded by our Korua Hare Reneti. There was some opposition, and it was Matarena sitting there in the front who told our relations, Manu Paul, Waka Verko, and John Hunia, we're supporting this, so that's it. Anyway, you know what they're like, ne? Oh, just some photos that I found the other day of our other, some, and it's only some of our Korua who were prominent in Te Hahi and supported Te Kooti, Te Whare Kaihua, Noki Te Pono, and Whainua Simpson. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that our Kuia Matu has a whānau connection. To the far left is Maiere Kōmene. This is Kōmene's daughter, Te Kooti's brother. He had a relationship with a woman called Maora Tātai, who is, if you know Mahaki, a daughter of Herewini Tamai Huia, and Peneha Huia is her brother. Anyway, so Maiere is the daughter of Kōmene. These are her children, Matu, Keetia, Te Waimātau, and Taurunga. They also had a son, Herewini, but we don't have a photo of him, and he had no uri. The only ones who had uri were Waimātau, Taurunga, and Keetia. Now, our other connection, there is Mere Kiingi in the middle. She also was one of Kōmene's wives. And next to her, on the right-hand side is her son, Wee Po Tātu Brown. And next to Mere, in the middle with the baby, is Wee Brown's wife, Pia. Anyway, it's a little bit complicated, but it comes down to this. Two brothers, and a brother and a sister got together with another brother and sister. So those from Te Rāwhiti and from Mahaki and Rongowhakaata will know of the kuia Te Tāwhi. Well, Te Tāwhi comes, of course, from Wee Parone. Potae tātu there. And some of our Ngāti Awa people sitting right at the front of his mum, Pia, sitting in the front there is Kuraua Tūtapu Paraone or Tūtapu Brown, our relation Popsy Brown's father from Poroporo. Anyway, so there's Te Tāwhi, a mokopuna of Kōmine, and there's Matu, another mokopuna of Kōmine, and there's one of the merepaunamu that Te Tāwhi gave to Matu, which was one of the collection that had originally been in the custodianship of Te Kooti. So Te Tāwhi gave it to Matu. When Matu passed away, it got into the hands of some of our people. That photo of all the kaumātua of Ngāti Awa sitting in front at Te Wainui, going to Wharekauri, they took, Edward has got it in his hand, this merepaunamu to Wharekauri, and my aunties, being very determined, got it back. So it's with our relation Gerard at the moment. He's the custodian of it. Anyway, what it highlights again is that personal connection that Te Kooti's brother Kōmine, his Uri, were very, in our Ngāti Awa area and within Mahaki, were prominent within the hāhi and had these other dimensions and relationships, including around taonga. Okay, second to last aspect I just wanted to touch on briefly, as we've seen through Taiarahia's work, those waiata. And so I just did a quick little search of how many times the word Ngāti Awa is mentioned in Te Kooti waiata or Te Kooti mentioned in Ngāti Awa waiata. And here are two examples. We heard earlier a very detailed analysis of Kaore Te Pōnei, where it refers to hauhia kia Ngāti Awa. And then secondly, the lament for matahina, te tangi mō matahina, by Te Araroa of Maniapoto. And you see there she mentions Rikirangi in that waiata. And at the opening of Orua Taupare, as I mentioned, Te Kooti didn't attend, but he sent a waiata and a kupu. And the waiata was also a lament for the loss, the pending loss of the matahina block. And again, it's one of those things where when you read it, you think, geez, that's harsh. That's harsh. Mourn for the loss of this land, be not linger on your memories. Turn inland to the forest of matahina to sustain you. Beware, though, for you will sell the birds of the forest for te huka o te pia. And, you know, it's almost like on autopilot and like under hypnosis. The 75,000 acre matahina block is 200 acres. It's all sold, all lost, all gone. Yes, we got some back from the settlement, but still, you know, it's almost like as soon as he says something, we're away, we're going to do it. What messages did Te Kooti leave for all of us, including Ngāti Awa? Remain steadfast in holding on to the land. Do not sell. How many times do we hear that? Even today, the K word is almost as odious as the land seller name. You know, it's like something that you don't talk about. And believe me, when I sit in the court, I see a lot of land going through, getting sold. You know, who am I? What am I going to say? But one of the admonitions he made was don't sell the land, because in reality, as we've seen, we don't have much left. 5%. 12% of the North Island. So that was one of his harsh lessons that he gave to us. Keeping the faith even in time of great adversity and doubt. Observing the Sabbath and the 12th. Remember the songs and the messages they carry. Renounce violence and the taking up of arms to resolve conflict. This is a person who we've heard all day had a gun to his head, running all around, trying to escape while riding his kupu, his waiata and so forth. I think it's his left hand, the two fingers are missing, being shot at. Attempts on his life regular. For him to say, we need to renounce violence, is one of those enduring messages. And then he also says, which seems quite surprising, given his treatment, look to the law for redress because it is the shelter and the parent for the oppressed. You know, and you sort of think, 2004, foreshore. Okay. So it's the challenges that he puts forward to us, they're very onerous in the here and the now. You know, the law, how many times do we see that, how the law punishes our people, diminishes their rights? Regularly, we heard from Te Ngai here, the conflicts that take place all the time and having to try and confront and deal with the law. Now, the last thing I just wanted to say was, in the spirit of reconciliation and sharing, as the last speaker, just helping Taiara here and Te Kahutu with their tribal boundaries. Ohiwa is a shared location where we all have some interests of different layers and levels from time to time. But when Te Kooti was buried, that kuia I showed earlier, Maire Komene, her husband Kiriti was one of the 5 who buried him the second time. And remember, Te Kooti himself said, Turanga whenua, Turanga persons, Turanga tangata won't see me, but Turanga land will. And it's like, oh, okay. You know, and what I just want to emphasise in closing is Te Kooti within Ngāti Awa and Mātatua was this charismatic figure, enigmatic as well, and, you know, celebrity, it just doesn't do it justice. That whatever he said, they followed. And wherever he went, they followed. As you heard earlier, he travelled with an entourage of 2, 3, 4, 5, 600. Think of that today. Who of us can get 600, apart from the king, and Te Hau, get an ope of 600 to go wherever you went? So that leadership that he provided, again, a change agent, someone who left it an enduring legacy through his kupu, through his waiata, his uri, his whare that he also had overseen and built. So there are many, many dimensions, but one of the things was the strictness of his rules. And he would often test the tribes. And he'd turn up to the 12th and try and breach the rules himself to make sure they would enforce them. And we saw this many a time in Te Whanapanui and Te Whakatohea. Now, when I was about 10, my nan told me this story. And she'd tell us about going to see the prophet. And we used to think, oh, Nan, what are you on? Moses, whatever. You know, we used to think, the prophet, you mean like Moses and all that? No, but she meant ruakenana and people like that, you know, back in her days. Anyway, she told us that at one of our marae, it was a rule, no playing poker in the wharenui. You know, and how when we were little, we were not allowed to destroy playing cards, to throw them out or to deface them. This was like, it's like defacing the Bible almost. And we were like, what, snap? Okay, last card even then? No, okay. Anyway, no poker or gambling type of was allowed to be played in the wharenui. Anyway, she told me she was 5, so it was in 1918. She was born 1913. And she said that most of the kaumata were away at a land hui, and there was sort of the next level down in charge. So, of course, you know, when the cat's out of town, the mice get down. So they were playing poker in the wharenui, and being a 5-year-old, she was the, you know, run around, hey, get us this, get us that sort of thing. Anyway, she told me that after a while, it started getting a bit rowdy, and, you know, like, you're cheating, this sort of thing. Some other people turned up to the pa and started joining into the game. You know, not unusual, fundraising, you know, come alives and all those sort of things. And he sat at the table, all good. Yep, deal you a hand, etc. Anyway, his card fell down. So my nan, the auntie said, hey, go and pick the card up. Anyway, she went under the table to get the card, and she screamed and ran out of the whare. And they were like, wow, that blooming kid. God, ruri, you know, this sort of thing. Anyway, they carried on with the game, and things calmed down a bit. Then the game kind of broke up and everyone went away. Then the auntie said to her, "Hey, what was that all about?" And she says, "Oh, that man who came to play cards with us. When I went to get his card from under the table, he didn't have a leg, it was a hoof." And she was like, the auntie was like, whatever, guessing, you know, sort of attitude. So they gave her a whack, of course. And as they were going out of the whare over to back home, they were coming past the entrance to the marae where the car park, well, where today the car park is. And then they looked down and there were hoof marks. So don't play poker in the wharenui, you know. So, you know, if we even brought our cards out, boof, you get a dong. Don't bring cards into the wharenui, playing cards like that. Te Ngaihe said, he made a reference to Te Kooti, his leadership, his charisma, and he mentioned Bob Marley, not by name but by implication. Well, it's not by accident. Te Rakuia Judith Binney called her book Redemption Songs. And remember, at the end of it, she says that one of his abiding memories amongst those who knew him well, he'd always default to, look, I just come to bring the songs. And that part of his legacy, those waiata that we still carry, that we turn into works of art, as Tayara here said, is full of meaning and portent as any Shakespearean speech or sonnet or T.S. Eliot, call it what you will. That rich legacy is still amongst us, as is his high. Yes, there are challenges, as Te Kahutu pointed out, and we need to meet those challenges. Anyway, thank you for your attention. That's a tiny little snippet. And what I thought too, because our day has been long, kāre he wai, once we have our karakia, hopefully we'll have our waiata rāwiri. So, tēnā koutou katoa.